When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him, but not during the feast, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. While Jesus was in Bethany, in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which he poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. Now, if we look at what it says in Matthew here, it says, when Jesus had finished saying these things. So these things was the 𝗷𝗚𝗏 discourse in Matthew 24, the end times parables in Matthew 25. He's just finished that, and he says, hey, it's 2 days before Passover. So we'll date this at Tuesday night, before the Galilean Passover on the Thursday night that Jesus was going to celebrate with his disciples. As Jesus was saying these things on the Tuesday night up on the Mount of Olives, the chief priests and the elders of the people were meeting together and conspiring in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. Now, if we look into both Mark and John, they give us extra information that it was also the scribes who were involved. So we have the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, who would basically make up the Sanhedrin, which is the top 70 judges in Israel, who rule in the Jewish high court. Now, the chief priests, you could liken them to the clergy or the leadership of the Sadducees, okay? And the scribes, or the teachers of the law, they are the leadership or the clergy of the Pharisees. So in both these Jewish religions, you have ordinary people who work in the marketplace, laymen, we would call them, and you have the clergy. So the chief priests are the high priests, and the number one chief priest is the actual high priest of Israel. So the high priestly families, they are Sadducees, and they run the temple and all the Mosaic rituals and sacrifices. Then you have the Pharisees, and they have the scribes, and they're the ones that used to write out the scriptures. But then in this day and age, they became the teachers of the religious law. And so these were the ones who led the Pharisees. So everyone's joining together here to conspire against Jesus. The Pharisees want Jesus dead because Jesus is coming up against all their oral traditions and saying that you're adding to the law and you're doing all these things outside of the scripture. And he was having a go at all their religion, and he just said that in Matthew 23, just before the 𝗷𝗏𝗏 discourse. He said the 7 woes, where he said, you don't help anyone, you don't even lift a finger to help them. All you do is weigh them down with burdens, with rules of do's and do nots. Yet you don't help them in any way, shape or form. So they had this religious legalism that Jesus was coming up against. And the people were turning away from the Pharisees and were following Jesus instead. And then the Sadducees wanted Jesus dead for a completely different reason. They thought that Jesus was going to start a revolution, like Jesus Barabbas. Barabbas was a revolutionary, and that he was going to overthrow the Roman government. And because he was rebelling against Caesar, that the Roman government was going to come in and was going to take back the temple and the nation off of the Sadducees, and they were going to lose their high position because they were really ruling as a subsidiary of Rome, and they just had this pseudo type of temple sacrifice system in place to make it look Jewish. And they had all the perks of being the noblemen and being the high families. And they were potentially going to lose that because of Jesus. So there's 2 completely different reasons why they want him dead. But the fact is they can join together. They're against each other in every other way, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They don't agree on barely anything to do with religion or politics. But with Jesus, they agree, we want to get rid of him. So they come together with the elders, they join up, and they're trying to find a way to arrest Jesus and kill him secretly, because they know that if the people find out they did it, then the people are going to stone him to death. The people are on Jesus' side, he has the majority. But they have a dilemma. There's a feast of the Passover coming up, and they don't want to do it then because the people will riot. And so they don't know what to do. They don't know what the solution is to this problem. And this meeting happened 2 days before the Passover. Matthew says explicitly. But then in verse 6, it says, while Jesus was in Bethany, in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume. But what you've got to consider is that Matthew 21 and Mark 11 both state that after the triumphal entry, the procession of Jesus into Jerusalem on the donkey's colt, that he went up to stay in Bethany on the Mount of Olives. And he continued to do this every single night, including this day here, 2 days before the Passover. And so we have him dated there 5 days before the Passover, 4, 3, and 2. And then John says that 6 days before the Passover, they were also at Bethany. So this, while Jesus was at Bethany here, can relate to any of that time. It doesn't have to be 2 days before the Passover. We read things in our modern day English vernacular and we say this must be in chronological order because that's usually the way we write. This happened, then that happened, then that happened, that happened. But not the gospel writers. Sometimes they'll put a story in that happened previous. They'll reminisce if it's relevant to what's going on either side of that story. And so the Pharisees and the Sadducees, with their leadership, the chief priests and the scribes, are meeting. They want to get rid of Jesus. They don't know how to do it. And this story is going to provide the solution. It has the key elements that provide the solution as to how they eventually came up with a plan to make this happen, and the conspiracy was actually outworked, and it's going to be outworked through Judas.